I might have a little bit of background noise today. Not sure if you guys will be able to hear that, but hopefully it won't be too much of a distraction. All right, Facebook is finishing setting up and we should be good to go. All right, meeting is now live streaming on Facebook. So, let's see. Okay. Today, I wanted to go more in depth into something that I mentioned in not last week's video, 2 weeks ago. Sorry, I missed last week. There was a lot going on about the media dimension variables. In other words, why we use certain art media at certain times. Okay. So I don't have your all's material list in front of me, but I'm just gonna go down some of the basic things as I remember them. Should have printed that off, but I may look back at that and put some additions in the comments on this video as I think it's relevant. So first I'm going to talk about paper, different types of paper and sizes. And then I'm going to talk about crayons, oil pastels, chalk pastels, kind of the difference between all of those and demonstrate a little bit for you guys. I just realized I forgot to get out my chalk, but I will get that later when I get to that. So, and the paint as well. Oh goodness, I forgot to get, well, you guys will just awkwardly see me get some of that out, all right? And you have a view of my cluttered studio behind you here. My shelf with my Lysol on it for my few in-person clients that I see here. I'm having to clean very well. It's a cluttered little space, but that's how art spaces are a lot of times, and it's okay. So first we're gonna talk about paper. Okay, so as I say in your all's instructions, in your first intro lesson there, before you get into the sessions, you can do all of this on regular white copy paper, like printer paper, and with crayons. So I'm going to talk about that first. It's possible to complete all of the session art tasks with those materials. I do suggest using some other materials, which I'll get into. So regular white copy paper, these are regular crayons, a collection of lots of different colors. It is nice to have a variety of colors, okay? So I like to dump them out and keep them in a bucket. Some people like the little, the rows. My daughter has that at home, the Crayola crayons all in their cute little rows, and you can see all the colors. That's great too. Eventually, I just find they don't fit in there and I put them in a bucket. I would suggest Crayola crayons specifically. And I may link in the Facebook group, but also at some point on the program site where you go log in to view the session material, I may link to some different products that I recommend. So Crayola crayons for sure if you're going to use crayons. And then there's a couple brands of oil pastels I recommend too. So regular Crayola crayons. You may have heard me say before that I have trouble a lot of times with these little regular sized crayons because I put a lot of force on the page. So I'll demonstrate that here. So this is my regular white copy paper. If I'm scribbling with this little crayon, of course you're going to get smaller lines, right? You're going to get, can we see that? You're going to get small lines, which sometimes we want. So we just want to keep in mind we're using the right tool for the job. So if I'm wanting to make smaller lines or color in smaller areas, or just if I'm wanting to lightly cover a large area, crayons are really great for that. Whereas markers, it's harder to cover a large area quickly with markers. It takes up a lot of ink. It takes up a lot of time. Sometimes that's very soothing and that's what we want to do. Sometimes we want to cover the area quickly. So here that's hard to see, but I lightly shaded in with this little crayon a pretty large area quickly. So if that's your goal, then these crayons will work well. Because I like to scribble and color very hard, I like these big jumbo crayons. I have a nice new pack of these at home that are great and still have the little point on them. These are my older ones. So these do not break as easily. So Crayola has their large size crayons that are kind of the kindergarten crayons. These are even larger than that. They're jumbo. So there's all different sizes. I tend to get them at Target or sometimes at other art supply stores. Hobby Lobby is a nationwide store here in the US that has a lot of the Crayola products. or you can get them online directly from Crayola or on Amazon, I'm sure. I've gotten Crayola products on Amazon as well. So I like the jumbo crayons. They are huge. So I'm coloring, like I'm pressing, like maybe not as hard as I can, but pretty hard on this page. And especially now that this one doesn't have the pointy new tip on it, that makes a wide mark, right? It makes a wide mark. It didn't feel like it was going to break or buckle under pressure. My whole table's shaking and this crayon is not breaking. So clearly that's more durable. If you feel a lot of that kind of anxious energy in your body or excited energy or anger that you need to let out on the page and not be afraid that you're going to mess things up or break the crayon, these can be really good for that. So the right tool for the job, the right tool for the emotion, you could say that. So if I do my body scan, like from session 1, which I suggest, doing that on a regular basis, maybe even before each time that you create art, before you do any of the session tasks, and I hone in on kind of how my body is feeling. If I'm feeling a lot of energy, then I'm maybe going to want to go for these big crayons. Another thing about these that I love is you can peel the paper off. I've got some long ones that the paper is off and some that have broken. They do break eventually. I've had a lot of kids use these as well. So it takes some time to peel the paper off, but that's actually really therapeutic, I find. And of course, you can do this with the little crayons as well. You can peel the paper off of these. Either way, when you peel the paper off, you can not only color with the end of it, with the tip, but with the side. So I'll show that here. This red should show up pretty good. So I did that several times to make it dark enough for you to see on the camera here. But that's from shading with the side of this. So, so you can intentionally break there. You can break it in half on purpose if you want to have that particular size. Width, I'm gonna switch to another paper, turn this over. Or you can, with that long length, gosh, like, so that green, it only took a few strokes. I know that's light on the camera, to kind of cover the whole page with the side of this big crayon. With the orange half one, I just broke, it makes just a wide line. So I encourage you to experiment with this. Maybe what I just said is nothing like super, enlightening for you. Like I know how to use a crayon, but I kind of wanted to demonstrate how you can just play around with the materials. So especially if you found yourself with any like resistance towards the scribbling and towards getting into the drawing, then just play around. Do it on a trash scrap piece of paper. Do it on in my free guide that I've emailed out to so many of you guys, that how to use art to rein in the overwhelm after narcissistic abuse. I say, did I say it in there? I think I said it in there, that you can use like a piece of cardboard from the recycling bin. I know I say that a lot on my it's my Mandala Monday posts in the Women Overcoming Narcissistic Abuse Facebook group. I say that no excuses, like you don't have something to create on. You can find a piece of trash to do your artwork on. So if that helps you to feel like not so much pressure, like I'm creating this piece of fine artwork, then do it on, it doesn't matter, a scrap of paper, and just experiment. So maybe before you get into the feelings drawing, or before you get into that, a second or third or fourth time, have a day where you're just playing around with it. You're not focused on following my directions. You're not focused on communicating any particular feeling. You're just playing with the crayons, with the oil pastels, whatever it is. So see what it feels like to color with the side of it. See how that feels in your body. So again, the right tool for the job, the right tool for the emotion. Later, the next day, next week, next month, when you come to do one of the art tasks, you'll know, oh, I remember how that felt to color with that side of the crayon, and that kind of matches, kind of how I'm feeling and how I want to express myself today. So play around with it, get acquainted with it, so that you kind of know what your go-to is going to be when you sit down to do one of the session art tasks. That is crayons. I love crayons. I think they get a bad rap. We think they're just for kids. I think they're really great. Again, because I tend to be anxious, I need to put a lot of pressure. They work really well. And those jumbo crayons are amazing. Okay, so I'm my crayons out of the way. I'll show you, I've got just a lot of kind of basic art materials out on the table here. There's nothing super fancy. Just some basic stuff. Okay, I forgot that I was gonna talk more about paper, so we'll switch to that. So you can use just regular white copy paper and crayons for everything, but let me show you some different kinds of paper. So in my materials list, I suggest some different sizes, more so than different types of paper. So at any art supply store or, you know, online, you should be able to find this. I think this is maybe a little bit larger than 11 by 17. I know 11 by 17 copy paper is a typical size. So you could easily find that if you want to stick with the thinner copy paper. This came in a pack from either Hobby Lobby or another store. I know Hobby Lobby has some controversy around it, so I don't want to sound like I'm plugging them, but that's just a place I go sometimes. I go to several different places and order online as well. This came in a pack, you know, a pack of drawing paper. So it's not a pad like where you rip it out. It's just a pack of loose paper like you get a pack of construction paper. This is a good in-between size that I recommend in several of the sessions. So that's what this looks like. Just a little bit, it's kind of like construction paper. You know, not texture, but just, you know, thickness, the weight of it is kind of like construction paper. So that's the next kind of basic that I recommend, is to have that variation in sizes. So you've got, you know, these two sizes to choose from. For the bridge drawing in session 2, this size can work well because it's longer, obviously, for that sort of landscape feel. So then construction paper, just regular colored construction paper that you can get at the grocery store, office supply, or, you know, school supply section of any store that has that kind of thing. So construction paper, you can pick out the white pieces if you want, or you can always have a colored ground. So you can start on a colored paper. That's something that I would recommend experimenting with first. Like I said, just experiment with how it feels for you. Also, you know, construction paper often has a little bit of a different texture than the white copy paper. So the copy paper is really slick. When you're using something like oil pastels, which I'll get to in a minute, it's going to go on much slicker on the white copy paper than on the construction paper. So you're going to want to experiment with that and just see how that feels to you. I like to work on yellow construction paper a lot, or the light blue, because the colors that you're using can still really show up. Whereas on a darker color like the red or dark blue, sometimes the colors of the crayons and things look different, which is fine. Just depends on kind of how you want it to look. Also, I want to point out that if there are a couple of colors of construction paper you like as your base for your drawings, at an art supply store, you can get a whole pack of one color usually. So just like you can get a pack of this white drawing paper, that's just loose paper, you can get a pack of, this is like it's kind of like this sort of yucky tannish brown color, but I really like that as a background. It has this kind of gold hue that comes forward, that I really like. And then gray is one that I like as well. So this is, if I'm wanting sort of a cooler feel to the background, cool colors versus warm colors, these both work well. So that's just my preference, to have kind of that cool color option or the warm color option. And I bought, you know, one pack of, I mean, I don't know if it was 25 or 75 or 100 sheets of the gray, and then of this sort of goldish brownish color. And you can do that with white as well. They sell packs of that regular size of just white construction paper. So a little thicker than the copy paper. You have some color choices. Then if you're wanting to go a little bit heavier weight, so if you find that when you're scribbling and coloring that you're like bending the paper up a lot, it's wrinkling up, it's tearing, then you might want to try a thicker paper like the construction paper, or this is cardstock. This, you can't really tell on camera, but it's like off-white cream colored cardstock. This came from just like Office Depot, Staples, some, you know, an office supply store where you get printer paper. You can also buy cardstock in various colors. So so I use this just if I feel like I want to layer more with the oil pastels, or you can use this for paint. So if you don't want to get into buying watercolor paper, which I'll show, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you go to an art supply store, though, it says watercolor paper. This is very thick. I mean, it's usually kind of expensive. You can buy individual sheets usually, or a pad like this. And this is that similar size, like I recommend for the bridge drawing. So if you were wanting to experiment with watercolor paints for that, or if you just wanted a thicker, nicer background, you can get the heavyweight watercolor paper. It usually has a texture though. So again, something to experiment with. It's not super smooth. Whereas the cardstock's not quite as thick and not as absorbent for paint, but it's very smooth. So if you like the slick feeling, this would be a way to go for a heavier weight paper, and also cheaper than the watercolor paper. And finally, one last kind of paper I'll show you. This is what I use when I'm wanting to work larger, and I'm wanting to paint, but not like on a canvas. This is called Bristol paper or Bristol board. Again, it says the name on there. This is usually pretty smooth and it's thick like a piece of poster board. So I think I say in your materials list, you can get a piece of poster board. It's usually around 24 by 22 inches. This is 19 by 24 inches. It's similar to poster board that you could get, you know, at the grocery store or wherever, school supply section. But you know, it's a little bit nicer. And so this is my go-to for painting with clients, and for myself, I like to tape it up on the wall, which here, I'll show you guys an example of that. I put an edge of tape, all of wide masking tape. Let me grab that. So if you want to tape your paper to the wall, I like to get this wide masking tape. I wouldn't use duct tape. I know this looks like duct tape. It's not, it's masking tape. Wide masking tape holds it well, or you could use narrow regular masking tape and just line the edges of the paper. And I've got a client, some paper up here. I have permission that the artwork can be on camera, so we're not breaking confidentiality here. This is a big piece of watercolor paper that was on a roll, but you can see where I taped up the edges. And this has been here since Saturday. It's been here a few days and it's staying up on the wall well. So, and I could take it down and retape it, of course. And that will leave a nice, it'll leave a nice edge. Like if he goes, this is a child's painting, if he goes back and paints all the way in that white background to the edge, then when it's dry, when we carefully peel off the paint, it'll leave a nice white border, which is like really satisfying, I think. And then of course, if you're feeling super fancy, you can always get, they're inexpensive. This is a canvas stretched on a frame. You can buy these, you know, packs of a few of these at a time. If you're wanting to make a more substantial piece of artwork, or I mean, I don't just paint on these. I'll like glue and collage and draw all kinds of stuff, because it's just like a nice sturdier surface. You can also buy wood panels like this, which I like. They don't have the give of the canvas, because of course canvas is, I mean, this is fabric, right? It's fabric stretched on this frame, and it has a coating of gesso, basically white acrylic paint on it, so that the paint can sit on top and doesn't absorb into that fabric. But you could also get this same type of thing, but a wood board, so it doesn't have that give like the fabric on there. It's a hard surface. So on one end of the spectrum, you can do your artwork on trash, on cardboard. On the other end, if you're wanting you know, a more substantial piece of work that's gonna last a while and you don't have to worry about, you know, keeping it in a folder or anything so it doesn't bend, you know, you can do a canvas or wood board panel. So that was a lot about paper. I've used up a lot of my time talking about paper, but I think this will be helpful for you all as you move along, especially if you're not familiar with these materials, or if you you know, some of us have a certain feeling of like reverence for the art materials and we can't play around with them. Hopefully this helps you loosen up and get an idea of how you can just play around with it. For oil pastels, so crayons are our first step. You could do it with crayons, but I do recommend oil pastels as well. So this is a great brand, Mungyo. I don't know if that's how you say it. I can also put a link to, I found a website the other day that had a lot of their products, Blick art materials. This has been well used. These are nice and wide, and they're good quality. So if you haven't used oil pastels before, sometimes with kids, I call them oil crayons. So it rubs, I mean, I just rubbed it off on my finger. They're much, it's like a cross between a paint and a crayon, because you can actually thin these with paint thinner that you would use for oil paints. These are water soluble too, like you can wash, it washes off your hands. You don't need paint thinner to wash it off your hands, but it can be compatible with oil paint. So it's like this, it's kind of like a paint stick in a way. But so if you get, a lot of times you'll find these student grade that says junior artist, Crayons brand or Pentel brand. These are not only skinnier, but they're just not going to go on as thick. And so that's okay. It just depends on what feel you're looking for. For me, I want it to go on smoother and thicker. And that's the whole reason why I'm using the oil pastel. Okay. So these, I'm going to experiment with these. I feel like those Crayons brand just now went on a little slicker than the Pentel one, but they weren't too bad after I just criticized them. These are new. Somebody gifted me with these. I typically, honestly, don't buy these because I like the other ones so much. But so that didn't go on too bad. So I just smeared it with my finger. There's some of the purple coming off my finger. So I'll go back to the ones I like here. So with these, same as with the crayons, you can peel off the paper. A lot of times they fall off after a while. Or you can leave it on there if you don't want your hands to get messy. These will get kind of messy on your fingers. I like to color with the side of it. So you can see, sort of. I like to color with the side, but the thicker you get with this, the more layers, the more it's going to smear. So again, when you're just playing around with this and experimenting, pick a color that's going to blend well. So I'll pick two warm colors that they're next to each other on the color wheel, so they're going to blend well together and not make brown. So I'm going to smear it. You don't have to smear it, but that's just kind of one of the fun things about this, that they can blend a little bit similar to paint. So there I just blended with my finger. So that gives a whole different element to this concept of the scribbling, because they have more versatility because you can blend them. Whereas with regular crayons, you're going to be, you can layer colors with the crayons, which is an interesting thing to play around with. But it's just going to act different than oil pastels. So those have different qualities. So I recommend both. Also, I don't even know what brand this is. This is what Hobby Lobby carries. They're similar. They're a thick, it's a similar type. But I know that Mungyo brand, those are available off various art supply store websites. So I'll recommend those. Let's see. I'll get to paint in just a minute. But as far as back to the explanation of the media dimension variables, which I mentioned in the other video, all that means is that there is this spectrum that art materials can be placed on, from resistive to fluid. So a crayon is going to be a little bit more resistive than an oil pastel. An oil pastel is more fluid. So it's not like watery fluid, but you can blend it. It smears. Okay. So a pencil, I have some colored pencils here. These are a great kind. This brand is Master's Touch, but I'm sure it could come in other brands. These are full lead pencils. So the whole thing is lead. There's not that wood around the lead. And I like these just how they feel in my hand, honestly. It has a little more weight to it. But so this is going to be more resistive. You You can't smear it. It's easy to control. So resistive media is easy to control, whereas fluid media like watercolor paint is going to be harder to control. So the right tool for the job, if you are feeling a need to really control your bodily movements and also the image that you're creating, you want it to be neat and controlled and precise, then use a pencil or a crayon or a marker, even though markers are kind of more fluid, especially a skinny fine tip marker is easy to control. I like to use Sharpies because of the vivid color they can get. They can be much more vivid than like a regular Crayola marker. So like that color, of course, they'll soak through the paper. They'll damage your table if it soaks through, and they have a smell to them because they're permanent markers. So things to keep in mind, they're, you know, a little bit more, maybe not toxic, but you know, it's not like a Crayola washable marker for sure. But those give you a vivid color, a big bang for your buck, and it's easy to control. If we want to open ourselves up to expressing more emotion, we want to be pushing ourselves along the spectrum to more fluid media. So if you feel really overwhelmed by all your emotions, I don't recommend you just jump into watercolor paint, like no looking back, you know. You want to ease into it and pay attention to how you're feeling. And that's why, again, I recommend returning again and again to the body scan, being in tune with how you're feeling, and then choosing art materials that can kind of help you express those feelings, help you explore those feelings. And this is something that takes practice to be in tune with. For me, I had studied art for years, you know, had a bachelor's degree in fine arts. I was like a professional artist and kind of intuitively had felt all these types of connections to the art materials, was very in touch with the process of art making and how it felt in my body. But then it was in studying art therapy that all the dots I started to connect all the dots, you know, like, oh, like there's a reason for this. There's a reason why when sometimes I go to paint and I just feel like I can't finish it. I feel lost in the paint and super anxious. And I turn my paintbrush over and start drawing lines in the paint with the handle because I feel like I need to control it. And that's because those days I was feeling more anxious and the paint felt too much for me. Like the colors would get muddy. I would just be lost in it. And I needed something more controlled. So I always have really loved drawing as well. I go back and forth between drawing and painting, and I combine the two. And I put lines in my paintings, which my painting professor used to say, you don't need lines. You can, you know, create the illusion of a line with your value, your shadow and light. And but I always really liked the lines, and it's because I needed that sense of control because I was anxious. So it all started to make sense to me once I studied it, but the art therapy side of things. But it takes a while to get in tune with yourself and how you're reacting to the materials. And as a part of that, we want to work towards developing this intuition while we're working. So I may think, you know, this feels really good today to be coloring with a pencil. That feels, you know, I might not even be able to put a word to it, a feeling word to it, but that feels good today. It feels relaxing. That's what I want to do. But then maybe when I finish coloring that in, maybe I feel more relaxed, and that's good. And maybe I've gotten some insight into my feelings, but maybe I didn't. Maybe I still feel anxious. Maybe I feel like I have a headache from like focusing too much on tiny details. Whatever it is, maybe that wasn't helpful. So now what do I feel like my body needs? Do I need to just sort of relax into it? And, you know, maybe I was treating this as too precious. Like I wanted to draw a flower and make it look like a flower. And I did this really tight, controlled drawing of a flower, but I don't like it. So what could I do in that moment? I always recommend if something starts to feel too precious, try messing it up, do something new, paint over it, draw over it, make it into something else. So maybe if that flower drawing that I loved in the beginning, now it feels too tight and controlled and I hate how it looks. Okay, you can hate how it looks and that's okay. You don't have to look at it again, or I could change it if I want. You know, I don't think you always have to like the finished product, but if you really hate it, let's explore that, you know? So who's to say I can't take this red oil pastel and scribble over it. And then maybe in that process, I find that I've got some anger pent up that I was wanting to control and not express. and that's what needs to come out. And then maybe I get my orange and blend that into it, and I keep going, and then I do my reflective writing, and I get some insight into that pent up anger that was in my body that I was not wanting to let out. So, you know, we want to develop this intuition and knowledge of how we relate to the art materials, so we can better kind of meet ourselves where we are, and you know, give ourselves what we need in that art process. I know I'm at my time, 12:30. I'm going to go a little longer. Let's see. So talked about those basic materials. I want to get into paint for just, chalk and then paint for just a minute. Okay. I'll get a new piece of paper for the chalk. I forgot to get that out, so I'm going to grab it off my shelf real quick. Okay, just like with the oil pastels, there's all different types and levels of chalk. There is cheap student grade stuff. There is, you know, more expensive things. That's it's up to you what you use. Basic chalk pastels are going to be just fine, which I can't find. I know I have a more basic, like cheaper looking box of these. These look a little fancy, but it's essentially the same thing. These are just a little higher quality. You can kind of tell the difference, but so we want to get soft chalk pastels. So oil pastels are like an oily crayon stick. Soft chalk pastels are chalk. They're most of the time you'll find them in the square shape. I have some that are round here. Again, these are the nicer ones. I don't know where my cheap ones went. These are round. This brand is a Rembrandt brand. This is Gallery brand. I don't know. So, and this is like in a nice fancy cushiony box. Other ones I have, you know, they're not going to be wrapped in paper. They're not going to look quite this nice, but those basic square soft pastels, chalk pastels, is what we're talking about. Or, you know, sometimes they come in this rounder version. Also, I just wanted to mention, this is a really old box of charcoal. Charcoal is similar. Charcoal is black, and it is very, very black and dark. And just if you're really wanting that darkness to your picture, then go for that. But as far as the process of how you work with it, it's similar to the chalk. But if you use that with your colored chalk, just be aware the black could really overpower it. And maybe you want that, maybe you don't. Again, play around with it, experiment before you use it in a piece of art, you know, in one of our art tasks. And a final other piece of chalk, I don't recommend this in our program, but just for the sake of education to let you know, these are called Conte sticks. And so it's smaller. And again, they're usually in this square form. They're smaller and they're not as soft. So they're not going to smear as much. They're not quite as fluid. We're getting really nitpicky here with the levels of fluidity. So the soft chalk pastel is going to be quite powdery and fluid. The Conte stick is going to be definitely still chalk and smearable, but not as soft, not as powdery. It doesn't like break off as easy. So I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to take, I really don't like paper on things. I like this side of it open. I'm going to take the paper off of this square chalk pastel. So the difference in different levels of quality is just, this feels heavier. It's like thicker. It's got more to it. Whereas a cheaper chalk pastel is just going to be, it's going to kind of disappear more easily. It's a lighter weight, you know, I guess a little bit more fluid too. So something that I love about this, I mean, that you can see right there, this is a dark color, but also just it goes on the page so easily. Like I am putting forth very little effort. So if you're feeling depressed, like lacking in motivation, like you don't have a lot of physical energy to put into it, like the opposite of how I am with my jumbo crayons, then the chalk pastels might be a way to go, because you just get a big bang for your buck here. So I barely pressed it all and got this nice dark line. Now, if I'm wanting to do details and keep this as lines, I'm going to probably get frustrated because this is going to smear. I also barely have to touch it with my finger and it smears. Okay. So that's good if that's what you're going for. So when we talk about fluid materials, we want something that's going to spread around the page pretty well. So I just colored a lot on there. Similar to with the oil pastels, the more layers you get on there, the more you can smudge it. This, the more color you get on the page, the more chalk dust also gets on the page. And it's actually that chalk dust that you're going to be smearing around. So you can do this with your hand or with a paper towel or something, you know, if you don't want to get your hand dirty, especially if you use the black charcoal, it's not going to wash off your hands right away. It's going to take several washes. Sometimes with the colored chalk as well. So, I mean, really just with that much coloring, I mean, I can fill up like three-fourths of this page with color, and then I can keep going. I can layer on top. Again, if I don't want to make sort of a brown muddy color, then I'll use colors that are similar to that on the color wheel to blend. So I'll use a lighter green to show you how I could blend that. And then we'll move on to watercolor paint in just a second. We'll be done. But so I added that lighter green. That's hard. You can't really even see that on the camera, can you? Blue, also added some blue on there. It's going to create quite a bit of dust. You can blow it off, but oh, see, that just got on my computer. I like to kind of get it together and put it in the trash can if I haven't spread all the dust around, if there's some extra on there. Okay. So you can see, so the oil pastels are smudgy, so they're more fluid. The chalk pastels are even more smearable, more fluid. So what that does in our brains is that gets us more in tune with our emotions. So just like my example of drawing with the pencil and I'm feeling anxious and maybe that feels good, maybe it doesn't. Then if I start with oil pastels, I can get a little more in touch with whatever emotions are going on there. I tend to want to push towards the fluid media, but I recognize there are days where we need those freaking pencils. We need that control, and that's okay. So I don't know. I don't talk much about colored pencils and that kind of thing because that's not kind of my go-to, because I find not only for myself, but for my clients, like a lot of us are, we could stick with those pencils and with fine tip markers like all day long and not really get into the art process and expressing ourselves. That's a safe place for us because we want to be more in control. We've felt so out of control that like we're trying desperately to control our environments and control ourselves and our emotions. And that's not going to help us grow too much. So I always want to push towards the more fluid media, but I recognize there are days where you need the pencils, you need the more resistive media. So finally with the watercolor paint, I'm going to just do it on the back of this. My hands are super dirty. I mean, you guys know what paint looks like, but I'm just again going to demonstrate. Give me just a second. It's awkward that this is live. I found a different bucket of water I already had filled up from earlier, and I'm going to grab my paint. Okay. I don't have, so this is an older set of watercolor paint that I had a long time. You can also get there's just the Crayola set of watercolors, which if you've done my free guide, the activity in there recommends those watercolor paints. Let me see if I have one of those. Here we go. This is the double wide version. You can also get it just the single row. This has more colors. So it's the same thing. This is a little bit higher quality, but it's essentially the same thing. Okay, I'll use the Crayola one. So Watercolor paints are going to be probably the most fluid type of paint. The reason I recommend it though is because just for ease of access, you can get this in the school supply section at your grocery store. It's easily accessible. Most people have used it and know how to use it. So that's why for our purposes, that's what I recommend. But it is all the way on the fluid end of the spectrum. So if you're not used to using paint, it might be a big jump for you. So I'll point out some other kinds of paints too. But this is typically just an affordable, easy to access, not too messy to use at home, way of painting. So want to make that clear that the reason I recommend it in the program is more for that easy factor. But it is a jump. It is more fluid. Okay. So you have to wet each little color spot to sort of activate the paint so that you can use it. Whereas, of course, other paints that's in a tube, you squeeze it out onto a paint tray or, paper plate, whatever you're using as a paint palette. This is your palette and you just wet it. You can start using it. So of course you got to rinse your brush in between because if you don't, you're gonna mix all these colors and it'll all turn muddy. But where you can mix, and you're free to make it muddy if you want to, is on the paper. So I'm doing some blues and purples here. I'm not dipping my brush in the water with this because I keep going back to the same color. Gosh, I tend to want to be messy. I'm like, oh, I don't want to dip my brush again, but it's good. I don't want these to get brown. And I'm going to add a little green. Okay. So clearly that just went on super easy. I can layer and blend these with watercolor paint also, especially if you're using the watercolor paper. You can wet the whole paper first, and then it's really going to bleed and spread. So talk about control. That is super out of our control, right? You're having to just trust where the paint's going to go, how it's going to fill the page. So that's very different from using a pencil. So be in tune with kind of how you're feeling and what you want to express. It may be that you think you want to paint, and then that makes you feel anxious. Like my example, when I used to paint and just kind of get lost in it, and I needed to start making lines. So you can, if you feel overwhelmed by that, set it aside, switch to something else, let it dry, come back to it later and draw on top of it. Like in the free guide, I talk about, after it dries for a few minutes, then you're going back in and tracing lines. That's because it helps us kind of rein in those feelings that the paint has brought out. So, so kind of go with it, push yourself a little bit, but trust, if it's making you anxious, don't do it. Like, don't go there. If it's making you more overwhelmed, that's not the point. Okay. So, I wish that would show up good. Yeah. That made a really beautiful harsh edge there. So, watercolor can be, really beautiful in kind of the accidents that happen. But it's also can be frustrating because it's not very forgiving. You can't layer like you can with other paints. Whatever you put on there is going to show. I will get just some regular tubes of acrylic paint real quick, just to show you for those who aren't, familiar with those things. Okay. Didn't have room on my table for everything. These are some basic, this actual brand is called Basics, Liquitex Basics, acrylic paint. So these are water soluble. You can wash up with water, soap and water, but it does not wash out of clothing. It'll stain clothing. The way I describe it to people is like it's kind of liquid plastic. So it'll dry on fabric, almost like a fabric paint. Like eventually it'll wash out, but it pretty much stays on. You can also get tempera paint, which is typically what is used in an elementary school because it's washable. So tempera paint is an option, but it does not dry. It can be kind of flaky when it dries on a paper if you've gotten it real thick. The good thing about acrylic paint, because it's like liquid plastic, if you get it really thick on your paper or on your canvas, it's going to stay like this thick mound of how you made it. It's going to be like sort of a more permanent kind of finish. This is another brand, Master's Touch. Yeah, so these are good if you're wanting something more opaque, if you're wanting to mix colors, you want to experiment with paint beyond just the watercolor tray, which is pretty limiting. Also, watercolor paints come more higher end professional quality watercolors come in little tubes. So you may have used that or seen that. So that's a way if you like the watercolor, but you want to be able to mix and not be controlled by this tray, you can get little tubes of the watercolor paint. So those are meant to be liquidy, super fluid. You mix water with it before you start working with it. These you can mix water to thin it out. So you can make them as thin as watercolor paint if you want, but there's more versatility. You can use it thick right out of the tube. You don't have to add water to it. If you're not familiar with art materials, that was probably really overwhelming. Hopefully most of you have enough experience that was helpful to see, basic materials you're familiar with, but also hear how, how it plays into the resistive versus fluid concepts that I've been talking about. So let me know in the comments on this video if you have any questions. This is something that I'll probably go over and over. I'll go over and over again. So the session 1 scribble technique and getting used to the body scan, the expressing your emotions through the lines and shapes, and also getting accustomed to the reflective writing, the witnessing your artwork, having it speak to you, and then the resistive versus fluid media, and just developing kind of an intuition about what you need as you approach the art. That is all super foundational to all of the work that I teach, to what I've been through and explored myself with using art to recover from abuse. So to redefine who I am. So these are the basics that I'll go over again many times. I'll never get sick of your questions on this because I know it's a lot and this is so foundational. I want to keep talking about it. So please let me know any more questions that you all have about this. And I'm ending at 49 minutes instead of 30 minutes, but hopefully this was helpful to you. And I will see you next Thursday.